What would you sacrifice to keep your dreams alive? For Clara Whitmore, a small-town designer in Charleston, that question came on the night her shop was about to close forever. Rain streaked the windows, debts pressed in from every side, and then a stranger walked through the door. Jonathan Hale, billionaire, powerful, untouchable, a man who could buy anything, except the peace he'd lost long ago. His offer was unthinkable, a marriage of convenience. 2 years, no love, no promises, just survival for her, and stability for him. But what begins as a contract soon stirs something neither expected. Clara, with her quiet strength and the wooden ruler her father left her, awakens feelings Jonathan has buried since his mother's death. And Jonathan, behind all the walls of wealth and power, makes Clara wonder, is it possible to build a home not out of wood and fabric, but out of trust? When scandal strikes, when doubts threaten to destroy them both, only one question remains: will they cling to the safety of the contract, or risk everything for love? Stay with us until the end, because this story may just change the way you believe in second chances. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The rain came down steady that evening, a curtain of silver against the tall windows of Whitmore Home and Design, Clara's little store on King Street in Charleston. The glass trembled under the downpour, and each streak of water blurred the soft glow of the street lamps outside. Inside, the lights hummed low, casting a tired golden haze over a space that had once been the beating heart of her dream. Clara Whitmore, 34, stood barefoot on the creaky oak floorboards, her hands resting on the edge of the front counter. Around her lay the fragments of 3 years of works, hand-woven baskets, framed sketches of room layouts, a few unfinished lamps she had made herself from reclaimed wood. On the far wall, the shelves that used to brim with cushions, pottery, and little touches of her style now looked bare, almost ashamed of their emptiness. A box sat open at her feet. She bent down, tucking away a set of ceramic mugs she had once displayed proudly. The sound of cardboard tearing against wood echoed too loudly in the hollow shop. It made her chest ache. Her eyes wandered to the workbench at the back, where scraps of fabric, a half-burned candle, and her father's old measuring stick still lay. She reached for it, the wooden ruler, worn smooth from decades of use. Along the side, the name James Whitmore was etched by hand, her father's own careful carving. Clara traced the grooves with her thumb. The ruler still carried faint stains from varnish, perhaps even a memory of sawdust trapped in its grain. Her father had been a carpenter, a craftsman who believed that wood had a soul. He had passed on that belief to her before he died 5 years ago, suddenly, from a heart attack that no one saw coming. Every piece tells a story. Clara, he used to say, his voice deep and calm, our job is to honor it, to shape it with care. Those words had built the foundation of her dream, and now, standing in the dim light of a shop about to close forever, they cut like glass. The rent was overdue again, 3 months late. The last notice from the landlord sat folded on the counter. She had read it so many times that the ink had smudged. If she didn't hand over the keys by Friday, legal action would follow. She closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against the cool surface of the counter. A storm rumbled above, deep and low, as if the sky itself carried the same heaviness in its chest. What was she supposed to do now? Clara wasn't naive. She had known for months that sales were slipping. That foot traffic wasn't enough to keep up with rent in the trendy district of Charleston. She had poured in her inheritance after her father passed, her savings, even maxed out a credit card or two. But no amount of heart or creativity could fight the steady reality of bills. The truth was plain. Her dream was collapsing. She walked slowly toward the front window, her arms wrapped around herself. On the glass, rain smeared the reflection of a woman who looked older than 34. Her dark blonde hair was tied back in a loose knot, stray wisps curling against her damp cheeks. The faint lines around her eyes told of long nights sketching, worrying, pushing herself too far for too little return. For a moment, she hated that reflection, not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it carried the look of defeat behind her. The shop felt like a church after the congregation had gone silent, echoing with ghosts of laughter and the shuffle of customers who used to wander in, complimenting her eye for color or the warmth of the displays. She remembered one woman telling her, "Your shop feels like home. I just want to sit here and breathe." And that had been the goal all along, to create a space that felt like home, that honored her father's philosophy that everything wood, fabric, stone carried meaning. But good intentions didn't pay Charleston rent. She sat down on the old armchair near the window, the one upholstered in linen she had dyed herself. The cushions sagged beneath her, but it was comfortable, familiar. Outside, headlights cut across the rain, strangers hurrying toward warm houses, toward lives that at least appeared stable. Clara watched them with a kind of yearning. Inside, her chest filled with questions she had asked herself too many times. Should I give this up? Should I find a job with a steady paycheck, even if it means designing someone else's ideas instead of my own? Would Dad forgive me if I let go of what he helped me start? The thought made her throat tighten. She pressed the ruler against her heart and let the silence answer. A drop of water fell from the ceiling onto the counter. The roof had been leaking for months. Another repair she couldn't afford. She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Even the building was giving up on her. She tried to imagine packing everything away, handing over the keys, walking out for the last time. But her body resisted the thought. Her hands clenched into fists. Her breath came short. She realized it wasn't just a business she was losing. It was the last tangible tie to her father, the last sanctuary where she could feel close to him. Her heart thudded painfully. The storm outside intensified, sheets of rain hammering against the glass. The sign at the front door painted in her neat hand. Whitmore Home and Design rattled against the frame. It sounded like a heartbeat refusing to stop. For the first time that night, Clara allowed herself to cry. She pressed her palms against her face, the ruler still gripped tightly in one hand. Tears came hot, unstoppable, and she let them. Because in that small shop, with the rain pounding and the lights flickering, she finally admitted what she had fought for months. She was terrified. Terrified of failure, terrified of being alone, terrified that maybe her dream had been foolish from the start. But somewhere, deep under the fear, a voice still whispered her father's voice that nothing worth building ever came easy. Clara lowered her hands, eyes swollen, breath unsteady. She looked once more at the shelves, the boxes, the empty space. The shop was ending. That much was clear. Yet a stubborn spark still lingered inside her. She whispered into the storm, as if to the memory of her father. "I don't know how, Dad, but I'm not ready to give up. Not yet." The rain answered with a hard clap against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. Clara didn't notice yet, but soon she would. Soon. A man would step through that storm and into her life, changing everything. But for now, she sat in the dim glow of her dying dream, clutching a wooden ruler, waiting for the last light in her shop to fade. The storm had grown heavier by the time Clara pushed the last box beneath the counter. The rain no longer whispered it, thundered, the kind of downpour that rattled windows and drowned out thought. She rubbed her temples, willing the tension to ease, when a sudden knock broke through the sound of water. Her head jerked up. No one should have been outside in weather like this. The shop had closed hours ago, and she hadn't expected anyone, certainly not a customer. Through the rain-blurred glass, a tall shadow loomed, broad-shouldered, unmoving. Clara's pulse quickened. For a moment, instinct told her to ignore it, to stay where she was and let the storm chase the stranger away. But then came a second knock, firmer, deliberate. She rose slowly, tucking her father's ruler into the pocket of her apron, as if it could serve as some kind of charm. With careful steps, she approached the door. Through the haze of water, the figure sharpened. A man in a dark tailored suit, coat collar turned against the rain. His hair thick, chestnut brown, was slicked back, yet somehow still perfect despite the weather. His face was lean, his jaw defined, and his gray-blue eyes locked on hers with unsettling intensity. Clara hesitated before unlatching the door. The bell above it gave a tired jingle as she pulled it open. Cold air swept in, carrying the scent of wet asphalt. "Are you Clara Whitmore?" The man's voice was deep, even like someone accustomed to being obeyed. She blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, but the shop's closed. I'm afraid we're not taking orders anymore." He didn't flinch. Instead, he extended a gloved hand. Jonathan Hale. The name landed with weight. Clara had heard it before, in passing, on news reports and glossy magazines. Hale Enterprises was everywhere: real estate, construction, luxury developments that reshaped skylines. He wasn't just wealthy, he was the kind of wealthy that people whispered about at dinner parties. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "I know of you," she admitted cautiously, "but I don't understand why you're here." Jonathan's gaze flicked past her, scanning the shop with quick precision, the bare shelves, the stacked boxes, the weary remnants of a dream. Then he returned his focus to her. "May I come in?" he asked, though it sounded less like a request and more like an inevitability. Clara's first instinct was no. This man, with his tailored perfection and aura of command, didn't belong here, not in her fading little shop. But curiosity stirred. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. Jonathan entered, bringing with him the faint scent of rain-soaked wool and something sharper, like cedar and steel. He moved with quiet confidence, his shoes clicking against the floorboards as he surveyed her space. "These are your designs?" he asked, pausing in front of a handmade lamp shaped from driftwood. "Yes," she said, folding her arms. "But they won't be here much longer. The shop's closing." He ran a finger along the edge of the lamp, his expression unreadable. "It's a shame. You have talent." The compliment caught her off guard, but she masked her surprise. "Talent doesn't pay rent," she said bluntly. Finally, Jonathan turned to face her fully. His eyes, though sharp, carried a shadow of weariness. "What if I told you it could?" Clara frowned. "I'm listening." He stepped closer, his voice low but unwavering. "I need a wife." The words hung in the air, absurd and heavy all at once. Clara blinked, unsure if she'd misheard. "Excuse me?" Jonathan's tone remained steady. "A marriage. Real on paper, but only for appearances. Nothing more." Clara stared at him. For a split second, she thought he must be joking, but his face remained as still as stone. "This is insane," she said, taking a step back. "You come into my shop at night, during a storm, and you tell me you need a wife. Do you realize how that sounds?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. "I'm aware of how it sounds. I'm also aware that I don't have much time." Clara shook her head, half laughing in disbelief. "I don't even know you." "You don't need to," he replied. "Not in the way you're thinking. This would be an arrangement, legal, beneficial for both of us. Nothing romantic, nothing binding beyond the contract." Her heart pounded, equal parts anger and bewilderment. "And why, exactly, do you need such a ridiculous arrangement?" He studied her, as though weighing how much truth to reveal. At last, he said, "My board of directors is concerned. They believe I lack stability, that I'm too consumed by work. They want to see a man settled, grounded, with a partner, someone who represents family values." Clara scoffed. "So you want me to play the part of your loving wife, smile for the cameras, nod at the dinners, while you go about your empire?" "Precisely." Her stomach turned. "Absolutely not." Jonathan didn't react, as though he had expected her refusal. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card, setting it on the counter. The paper was thick, embossed with his name in elegant black lettering. "I thought you'd say that," he said. His gaze lingered on her, steady, piercing. "But I also think you're underestimating yourself." Clara folded her arms tighter, defensive. "And what's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Jonathan said softly, "that you have more strength than you realize. That's exactly why I chose you." The storm raged on outside, thunder rolling like a drum. Clara's breath caught, her pulse refusing to settle. Jonathan turned toward the door. Consider it, or don't. Either way, the offer stands until tomorrow at noon. Before she could protest, he pulled open the door. A rush of cold, rain-filled air swept in, extinguishing the warmth of the shop. With a final glance steady, unreadable, he stepped back into the storm. The bell chimed once more as the door closed behind him. Clara stood frozen, Jonathan's business card lying stark against the worn counter. The words he left echoed louder than the rain. You have more strength than you realize. That's exactly why I chose you. She pressed her father's ruler tighter in her pocket, as if grounding herself. Her heart was a battlefield, part furious, part terrified, part strangely curious. And for the first time since she had opened her shop, Clara felt a shiver of something she hadn't expected to feel again possibility. The storm had moved on by morning, leaving Charleston washed clean, the air damp and heavy with the smell of wet pavement and magnolia blossoms. Clara stood in her kitchen, staring at the business card Jonathan Hale had left on her counter. It felt heavier than paper should, as if the ink itself carried consequences. She set it down beside her father's old ruler, both objects catching the pale light spilling through the window, side by side. They seemed to mock her, one, a reminder of where she came from, the other, a temptation to a future she didn't trust. Her phone buzzed. Maggie Collins. Clara sighed and answered. Hey, Maggie. Morning, honey. Maggie's warm southern drawl floated through the line, tinged with its usual no-nonsense undertone. I heard the storm knocked power out on King Street. You all right? Clara looked around her dim kitchen. I'm fine. Just thinking. About that shop of yours? Maggie asked gently. Clara let out a humorless laugh. When am I not? There was a pause. Then Maggie's voice lowered. You want me to come over? I've got nothing but time and leftover peach cobbler. Clara smiled despite herself. I'll order pizza. You bring the cobbler. Deal. See you in 20. An hour later, Maggie settled onto Clara's worn sofa. Still in her nurse's scrubs, though she had retired months ago, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much to waste time on pretense. Pizza boxes lay open on the coffee table, the smell of pepperoni and melted cheese filling the small living room. Clara poured them both glasses of sweet tea, the ice clinking softly. So, Maggie began, biting into a slice. Tell me what's got you looking like you lost your last friend. Clara hesitated. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she told Maggie everything: the storm, the knock on the shop door, Jonathan Hale's sudden appearance, his outrageous proposal. When she finished, Maggie set her pizza down slowly. Lord have mercy, she muttered. He walked in off the street and asked you to marry him. Not marry, Clara corrected quickly, though her cheeks burned. A fake marriage. For appearances. He said it'd be legal on paper, but temporary. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Temporary or not, that man's asking you to gamble with your whole life. Clara leaned back, rubbing her temples. I know, it's insane, but the way he said it, like he'd already decided I was the right one. It's been echoing in my head all night. Maggie studied her. And what did you say I said no? Clara replied firmly. Then, softer, at least at first. Maggie gave her a long look. But you're thinking about it? Clara exhaled, her voice barely above a whisper. I am. The admission sat heavy between them. She rose and walked to the small record player tucked in the corner. Her father's old vinyl collection leaned against the wall, sleeves frayed with time. She chose one without looking, set the needle down. A crackle filled the room before a familiar melody emerged. Frank Sinatra. Fly Me to the Moon. Her father's favorite. Clara closed her eyes. She could almost see him again, sanding wood in his workshop, humming along. The music wrapped around her like memory itself. She turned back to Maggie. I keep asking myself what Dad would say. Would he call this foolish, or would he tell me to take the risk? Maggie folded her arms, the nurse in her showing. Your daddy was a dreamer, Clara, but he was also steady. He knew the difference between a risk and a mistake. Clara sat again, pulling the ruler into her lap. She traced her thumb along the etched letters, whispering, "I can't tell which one this is." Maggie leaned forward, her gaze softening. "Honey, you've fought so hard for that shop. I've seen you pour everything into it, your money, your time, your heart. But sometimes, the bravest thing is knowing when to walk away." Clara shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "If I let it go, I'm letting him go. My dad. Everything he believed in." Maggie reached over, squeezing her hand. "Your daddy's not in that shop. He's in you, in the way you work, the way you see beauty where others don't. That doesn't disappear just because the store does." Clara swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. The record spun on, Sinatra's voice filling the quiet. Clara stared at Jonathan's card still resting on the table. Its edges caught the lamplight, a sharp contrast to the soft glow of home. "What if this is the only way?" she whispered. Maggie's voice sharpened. "You mean the only way to save the store, or the only way to save yourself from feeling like you failed?" Clara flinched. "Does it matter?" "It matters," Maggie said firmly. Then, gentler, "I don't trust him. Clara, men like Jonathan Hale don't give without taking, and they sure as hell don't show up at little shops in the rain without a plan." Clara nodded, but her mind kept circling back to his eyes, not just sharp, but tired. The way he had said, "That's exactly why I chose you." She rose, restless, pacing the room. The floor creaked under her bare feet. "It's ridiculous. A fake marriage. Who does that? Who even thinks of that?" Maggie leaned back. "People with too much money and too many problems." Clara laughed, a sound caught between humor and despair. She sat again, hugging the ruler to her chest. "I should throw that card away," she said. "Yes, you should." But Clara didn't move. Instead, she kept staring at it. Her mind split wide open, fear on one side, curiosity on the other. The record ended with a soft scratch. The silence felt louder than the storm the night before. Finally, Clara picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the number etched on the back of Jonathan's card. She looked at Maggie, whose eyes widened in protest. "Clara! I just want to hear his voice," Clara whispered. Her hand trembled, but she pressed call. The cafe sat at the edge of the Ashley River, an old brick building with windows that looked out on the slow-moving water. Clara had always liked this place, the harbor light, for its worn leather chairs, its mismatched mugs, and the smell of roasted beans that clung to the walls. It wasn't where she'd ever pictured meeting a billionaire, but maybe that was why she had chosen it. She arrived early, tugging her jacket tighter around her shoulders. The morning air was crisp, the storm long gone, but leaving the world hushed and clean. Clara ordered a black coffee, sat at a corner table by the window, and wrapped both hands around the cup as though anchoring herself. Her phone buzzed once. "On my way." The message was brief, efficient. She exhaled. At exactly 9 o'clock. The door opened. Jonathan Hale stepped inside, his presence bending the quiet room. He wore a navy suit, perfectly tailored, and yet his tie was loosened, as though he'd come straight from a sleepless night. His eyes scanned until they found her. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. Sliding into the chair across from her, he removed a slim folder from his coat. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. Clara arched an eyebrow. "You made it sound like I didn't have much of a choice." He ignored the jab, opening the folder. Neat stacks of paper gleamed under the cafe's amber lights. "These are the terms," Jonathan said. 2 years. During that time, we would live together in New York. You would accompany me to corporate functions, charity galas, public appearances. We would maintain the appearance of a stable marriage. Clara's stomach tightened. Hearing it laid out so plainly made it real, more than the surreal conversation in her shop. And, Jonathan continued, "I want to make one thing clear. This arrangement would not require intimacy, physical or otherwise. We maintain separate lives in private, publicly. We act as a couple. At the end of 2 years, we dissolve the marriage quietly, with compensation and assets in your name. Clara stared at him. You make it sound like a business merger. His lips curved in a humorless smile. That's exactly what it is. She took a slow sip of coffee. Buying time. And what exactly do I get out of this merger? Jonathan leaned back. Security. The financial means to reopen your business, connections to clients who can afford your designs, freedom from the fear of watching your work vanish. The words stung because they were true. He knew her weakness, and he knew how to weaponize it. But Clara wasn't about to sign away her life without pushing back. She folded her arms. If we're doing this, I have conditions too. Jonathan tilted his head, studying her. Go on. First, she said, steadying her voice, I want a studio of my own, separate from your penthouse, a place that's mine, where I can work without interference. He nodded once. Done. Second, Clara continued, I want full creative control. You don't touch my designs. You don't dictate my vision. If you're truly offering support, then let it be just that, support. A faint flicker crossed his face, but he agreed. Agreed. Clara leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. And finally, I want the right to walk away. If at any point I feel controlled, silenced, or trapped, the contract ends. No questions asked. For the first time, Jonathan hesitated. His fingers tapped once against the folder. Then he gave a curt nod. If that's what it takes to have your signature, so be it. Silence settled between them, heavy with what had just been spoken. The waitress came by, refilling their cups. Jonathan barely glanced at her. Clara muttered a quiet thanks. She stared at the stack of papers. Her chest ached with the weight of choice. Why me, she asked suddenly. You could find someone in your own circles, a model, a socialite, anyone. Why pick me? Jonathan's eyes softened just enough to unsettle her. Because you don't want my money. You want something of your own. That authenticity is what I need. Anyone else would see this as a step up. You see it as survival. That difference matters. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but part of her knew he was right. She looked down at her father's ruler, tucked in her bag. She thought of his words about risk, about honoring the story and the wood. She thought of Maggie's warning, two that men like Jonathan never gave without taking. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen he slid across the table. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years. Jonathan confirmed. The pen scratched across the page. With each stroke, Clara felt both dread and strange relief. By the time she set it down, her future had shifted irrevocably. Jonathan closed the folder with finality. Welcome to our arrangement. Clara exhaled, her palms damp. She wanted to feel triumphant, but instead she felt like someone standing on the edge of a cliff. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I'll have the necessary paperwork filed by the end of the week. I'll also arrange for your move to New York. She rose too, her knees unsteady. The cafe around them went on as usual, mugs clinking, spoons stirring, the hum of conversation. And yet, for Clara, the world had shifted on its axis. Jonathan extended his hand. She hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, steady, binding. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even friendship. It was a contract, and it was the beginning of something that neither of them could yet name. The train from Charleston had been long, the city skyline growing larger with each mile until it swallowed the horizon completely. By the time Clara stood in front of Jonathan Hale's penthouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, she felt as though she'd stepped into another planet. The building itself rose like a glass monolith against the sky, its sleek lines catching the afternoon sun. A uniformed doorman greeted her with polite efficiency, taking her suitcase and gesturing toward the private elevator. Clara clutched her father's measuring stick close to her chest. She had refused to let anyone else handle it. The elevator hummed as it carried her upward. 38 floors, 39, 40. The numbers blinked past, each one a reminder that she was moving farther and farther from the world she knew. When the doors opened, She found herself standing directly inside the penthouse. There was no hallway, no transition, just a sudden, overwhelming expanse of glass and marble. The first thing she noticed was the silence. The city roared below, horns and sirens, an endless hum, but inside it was muted, distant, as though she had entered a museum where sound wasn't allowed. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across two walls, revealing Central Park in its autumn splendor. The leaves burned gold and crimson, but the view, though breathtaking, felt like a painting hung too high to touch. The living room was immaculate. White leather sofas lined the space, accented by chrome tables and abstract art in black and gray. A grand piano sat untouched in the corner, its glossy surface free of fingerprints. Clara stepped cautiously onto the polished floor, her suitcase wheels squeaking in protest. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish, not of cooking or life. It was beautiful, but it was cold. She thought of her little shop in Charleston, the uneven floorboards, the scent of wood shavings and lavender candles, the way the light used to fall soft and imperfect through the windows. That space had felt alive, even in its last days. This one felt staged, waiting for someone to play the part of home. Jonathan appeared from the far side of the room, his jacket off now, shirt sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows. Even in this relaxed state, he looked composed, as if casualness had been carefully curated. "Welcome," he said simply. "I trust the trip was comfortable." Clara forced a small smile. "The train was fine. This place," she gestured around, "is incredible." Incredible was the polite word. Sterile was the honest one. Jonathan seemed to hear what she didn't say. "It suits its purpose," he replied, efficient, orderly. She set her suitcase down, suddenly feeling the weight of being an intruder. "Do you actually live here?" He arched an eyebrow. "Of course." Clara glanced around again. "It doesn't look lived in." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to a sleek console table and adjusted a stack of unopened mail. "I spend most of my time at the office." That much was obvious. The penthouse was less a home than an extension of his work. Minimalist. Controlled. Untouched by warmth. Jonathan gestured toward the hallway. "Your room is down this way. It's been prepared." Clara followed him past framed architectural sketches and perfectly aligned vases. The guest suite was larger than her entire apartment back in Charleston. A king-size bed dressed in crisp white linens, a walk-in closet already filled with clothes she hadn't chosen, and a private balcony overlooking the park. She stepped onto the balcony, gripping the railing. The city stretched below, vast and endless. For a moment, her chest tightened with awe and fear all at once. Jonathan's voice pulled her back. "If you need anything, ask my assistant. She'll arrange it." Clara turned. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, already distant again. "What about you?" she asked. He tilted his head, almost puzzled. "What about me, if I need something from you?" His expression softened, but only slightly. "Then ask. I'll do what I can, but my schedule is demanding." She nodded, though disappointment prickled beneath her ribs. After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The sheets were cool, the pillows plump. It was perfection, but it wasn't hers. She reached into her bag and pulled out the wooden ruler, placing it on the nightstand. She let her fingers linger on the carved letters of her father's name. The small object felt more real than the entire apartment. Hours passed. She unpacked slowly, placing her few belongings, some clothes, sketchbooks, a couple of framed photos into the cavernous space. Each item looked lost, swallowed by the scale of the room. By evening, Jonathan was gone again, called to a late meeting. A housekeeper had delivered dinner, a flawless plate of salmon and asparagus, arranged like art. Clara ate alone at the massive dining table, the empty chairs stretching on either side like silent judges. She found herself longing for the greasy pizza box she'd shared with Maggie, for Sinatra crackling on the record player, for laughter that filled the air even when things were falling apart. After dinner, she wandered through the penthouse, her footsteps echoing. She passed the untouched piano, the blank walls, the sterile perfection. She tried to imagine Jonathan here, sitting on the sofa, pouring a drink, listening to music, but the picture refused to form. Finally, she returned to her room, stood on the balcony, and watched the city lights pulse against the night. She thought of her shop, the rain, the moment she'd signed away 2 years of her life. Her father's words came back, unbidden. Every piece tells a story. Clara wondered what story this place was telling, because so far, all she could hear was silence. The first week in the penthouse felt like walking through someone else's dream, lavish, pristine, but hollow at its core. Clara moved through the rooms cautiously, never sure if she was intruding on a life that didn't actually exist. Jonathan was rarely there, and when he was, his presence filled the apartment with a kind of quiet pressure, like a clock ticking too loudly in a library. Their dinners became a ritual of silence. They ate at the long marble dining table, its glossy surface reflecting the soft glow of recessed lighting. Jonathan usually sat at the far end, papers spread beside his plate, glancing at his phone between bites. He ate quickly, efficiently, as though nourishment were just another task to check off his list. Clara tried to fill the silence once or twice, commenting on the view, the weather, even a headline she'd seen on the news, but his replies were curt, polite, and final. After a while, she stopped trying. The sound of cutlery against china became the only conversation they shared. It wasn't anger that unsettled her. It was indifference. One evening, as she pushed roasted chicken around her plate, Clara studied him across the table. His posture was perfect, his jaw tense, his eyes never lifting. He looked less like a man enjoying dinner and more like a soldier eating rations before battle. She found herself wondering, what kind of man lives like this? What kind of man hides behind such walls? The question lingered in her mind long after the plates had been cleared. During the day, she tried to keep busy. The studio space Jonathan had arranged was still being set up, so she sketched at the little desk in her room, filling pages with furniture designs and lighting fixtures that only existed in her imagination. She listened to old jazz records on her laptop, hoping the crackle of music would make the penthouse feel less sterile. But no matter what she did, the silence crept back in. Sometimes she caught herself staring at the untouched piano in the living room. Who had chosen it? Did Jonathan play? Or was it just another piece of expensive decor? She wanted to ask, but the distance between them always seemed too wide. Then, one night, something shifted small, almost invisible, but enough to unsettle her. She had come back late from a walk in the park, needing air, needing to be among people who laughed and talked and carried coffee cups with steam rising in the autumn chill. When she returned, Jonathan was already home, seated in the living room with his laptop open, the glow of the screen painting sharp lines across his face. He didn't look up when she entered. Clara went straight to her room, changed into comfortable clothes, and made her way to the kitchen. She set water to boil, pulling a tin of chamomile tea from her bag. It was the blend she'd always loved, light, floral, calming, but she hadn't mentioned it to anyone here. The kettle whistled softly. She poured the water, inhaling the steam, and carried the mug back to her room. The next evening, when she came down for dinner, a mug was already waiting at her place on the table. Chamomile, the exact blend she drank. She froze, staring at it. Jonathan didn't acknowledge the gesture. He sat across from her, unfolding his napkin, his expression as distant as ever. He said nothing, simply picked up his fork and began to eat. Clara glanced at him, then back at the tea. How did he know? The simplest answer was that he had noticed, that somewhere in his whirlwind of meetings and emails and guarded silences, he had seen her boiling water, had recognized the label, had remembered. The thought unsettled her more than the silence. All through dinner, she kept sneaking glances at him, searching for a sign that he wanted credit, that he expected gratitude. But his face revealed nothing. He didn't so much as glance at the mug. When the meal ended, Jonathan stood, gathered his papers, and said only, Good night." Clara sat alone at the table, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic, her heart unsteady. It was a small gesture, almost absurdly small, a cup of tea. But it cracked something in the wall she had built around herself since moving here, and that terrified her. That night, Clara lay awake in the cavernous bed, the city lights spilling in through the balcony doors. She held her father's ruler against her chest, the familiar weight grounding her. "This doesn't make sense. Dad," she whispered into the dark, "he's cold. He's closed off. He lives in a world I don't understand. So, why does one cup of tea feel like it matters?" No answer came, only the hum of traffic below and the faint tick of the clock on the nightstand. Clara turned onto her side, her thoughts restless. The silence that had once felt suffocating now carried a strange undercurrent. Beneath Jonathan's indifference, she sensed something unspoken loneliness, perhaps, or pain he refused to name. She didn't know if she wanted to break through those walls, but she couldn't deny that she wanted to try. The invitation arrived in a heavy cream envelope, embossed with gold lettering, a charity gala for children's education, hosted at one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels. Jonathan placed it on Clara's dresser without ceremony, his voice even tomorrow night. "You'll attend with me." She picked it up, tracing the raised edges of the lettering. "What exactly am I supposed to wear to something like this?" Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror, not looking at her. "Something elegant, something that looks expensive." Clara almost laughed. "Well, I can't exactly run out and buy couture." He finally glanced at her reflection, his eyes steady. "You'll figure it out." And she did. The next evening, Clara stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her room, smoothing the hem of a dress she had sewn herself. Midnight blue, cut with clean lines, the fabric falling just so across her frame. She had worked on it for weeks before leaving Charleston, never imagining she'd actually wear it. Now, as she fastened the final clasp, she caught her breath. For once, she didn't look like the woman holding a failing shop together with string and hope. She hated to admit it, like she belonged. When she stepped into the living room, Jonathan was waiting in a black tuxedo, his bow tie perfectly knotted. He turned, his practiced composure flickering for a split second as his eyes landed on her. "You made that," he said. Not a question. Clara lifted her chin. "Yes." His gaze lingered. "It's remarkable." Something in his tone made her pulse skip, but she forced herself to look away. "Let's go." The gala was a spectacle of chandeliers and champagne, strings of violins floating above the murmur of Manhattan's elite. Women in glittering gowns clustered in circles. Men in tailored suits laughed too loudly, and waiters glided between them with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. Jonathan slipped easily into the crowd, his hand resting lightly at Clara's back as they made their way through the ballroom. He introduced her by name, his voice steady, confident. "My wife, Clara." The word wife landed strangely on her ears. To her surprise, conversation came easily. Women approached to compliment her dress, astonished when she admitted she had designed and sewn it herself. A gallery owner asked for her card. A philanthropist in pearls pressed her hand warmly and said, "We need more women with your kind of vision." Clara found herself smiling, laughing, her nerves dissolving as the evening wore on. She spoke of design, of community, of her belief that spaces should feel like home rather than showrooms. People listened. They leaned in. She wasn't just Jonathan Hale's wife tonight. She was herself. At one point, Jonathan stepped back, watching her with a look she couldn't decipher. Admiration, amusement. Something softer. Maybe. When she rejoined him, a glass of champagne in hand, she tilted her head. "What?" He shook his head once. "Nothing. You're good at this." Clara arched an eyebrow. Surprised? Yes. His lips curved just slightly. And impressed. The admission sent a warmth through her chest she hadn't expected. Later, as the auction wound down and the orchestra shifted to slower melodies, Jonathan led her to a quieter corner. He looked every inch the composed CEO, but there was a spark in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "You've made more allies tonight than some of my executives manage in a year," he murmured. Clara took a sip of champagne. "Maybe you underestimated me. Maybe I did." For a moment, the noise of the ballroom seemed far away. The way he was looking at her, it wasn't performance. It wasn't calculation. It was real. Her heart stumbled in her chest. The car ride back to the penthouse was quiet, the city lights streaking across the windows. Clara watched them blur past, her mind replaying the evening, the laughter, the compliments, the way Jonathan's eyes had softened when he introduced her. When they stepped inside, she set her clutch on the console, toeing off her heels with relief. She turned to him, ready to say something, anything about how different tonight had felt. But Jonathan spoke first. His voice was low, measured, as he loosened his tie. "Remember," he said, not meeting her eyes, "this is still a performance." The words hit harder than she expected, stripping the warmth from the air. Clara folded her arms, swallowing back the retort rising in her throat. She wanted to ask if the way he had looked at her was performance too. She wanted to ask if the tea, the careful introductions, the flicker of pride she had seen in his eyes, if all of that had been scripted. Instead, she simply nodded. Of course. Jonathan disappeared down the hallway, leaving Clara alone in the vast, silent apartment. She sank into the sofa, the midnight blue fabric of her dress pooling around her. Her chest ached with something she didn't want to name, because if this was only performance, why did it feel so real? The penthouse had a way of amplifying silence at night. Clara had learned its rhythms, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant honk of cabs far below, the faint whistle of wind against the glass. Most nights, she went to bed early, exhausted from trying to find her place in this strange, cavernous home. But that night, something stirred her awake, a faint light, seeping beneath her bedroom door. She slipped on her robe and padded quietly down the hall. The glow came from Jonathan's office, a glass-walled room overlooking the park. She paused at the threshold, expecting to find him hunched over spreadsheets or conference calls. Instead, she saw him sitting in the dark, a single desk lamp casting a circle of light. Papers lay scattered, his laptop closed. His gaze wasn't on work at all. It was on a framed photograph propped against the desk. Clara took a hesitant step closer, the carpet muffling her movements. From the doorway, she could see it more clearly now, a woman with soft brown hair, eyes warm and familiar, holding a teenage Jonathan with an arm around his shoulders. Both were smiling, though Jonathan's looked more reserved, as if happiness had always felt foreign to him. The woman was beautiful, her features gentle, her smile radiant. But what caught Clara was not beauty. It was love. Jonathan didn't notice her at first. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the photo, a storm of emotions swirling behind them. Grief, regret, longing, couldn't sleep. Clara's voice was quiet, careful not to startle him. Jonathan's head lifted, the mask sliding back into place almost instantly. Just late work, but his laptop was shut. Clara moved closer, her bare feet silent against the hardwood. She nodded toward the photo. "She's your mother." For a moment, Jonathan said nothing. Then, with a small nod, he confirmed. "Yes, she's beautiful," Clara murmured. Jonathan's throat worked before he spoke again. Cancer took her when I was 15. The words hung in the air, fragile and raw. Clara had never heard him sound so human. She stepped beside the desk, her eyes still on the photograph. "My dad died 5 years ago. Heart attack. No warning." Jonathan glanced at her, his guarded expression flickering. Clara reached into her robe pocket and pulled out the wooden ruler. She set it gently on the desk, next to the photograph. The two objects, so ordinary, yet so sacred, sat side by side. "My father was a carpenter," she said softly. "He made this for me. He used to say that every piece of wood carried a story, and it was our job to honor it. I keep it with me because it's the last thing of his hands I can touch." Jonathan's eyes fell on the ruler, the carved letters, the grooves worn by years of use. He didn't touch it, but his gaze lingered. "My mother was an art teacher," he said after a pause. His voice had softened, stripped of its usual steel. "She used to stay up late painting, even when the treatments made her too tired to stand. She said creating beauty was what kept her alive, even when she was dying." Clara felt a sting in her eyes. "She sounds remarkable." "She was," Jonathan admitted. For a flicker of a moment, his face was open, vulnerable, the weight of loss unhidden. "I promised myself I'd make something she'd be proud of, that I'd build something lasting." His gaze hardened suddenly, the mask snapping back into place. He turned away, gathering the scattered papers as though burying the moment beneath them. "But that's not relevant. It's late. You should get some sleep." Clara wanted to reach for him, to say something that might hold the cracks open a little longer, but she knew better. Instead, she picked up her father's ruler, tucking it back into her robe pocket. She looked once more at the photograph. "Your mother would be proud," she said gently. Jonathan stilled, his back to her. For a moment, she thought he might respond, but then he exhaled, sharp and quiet, and returned to his papers. Clara lingered in the doorway, her chest heavy. She saw now what few ever did: the man behind the armor, the boy who had lost too much too soon. And though he tried to hide it, though he insisted it wasn't relevant, she knew the truth. The cracks in his mask were real, and they were only growing wider. The morning began like any other: emails, meetings, a rushed breakfast of black coffee at the dining table. Jonathan had left before sunrise, his phone pressed to his ear as he strode out the door, his voice clipped and sharp. Clara barely had time to murmur a quiet goodbye before the elevator swallowed him. By evening, she could feel it, the heaviness in the air, as soon as he stepped back into the penthouse. He didn't speak, didn't greet her, didn't even remove his jacket. He went straight to his office, the door slamming shut with a force that echoed through the marble halls. Clara sat frozen at the kitchen counter, a book unopened in her lap. She had grown used to Jonathan's silences, but this was different. This was a silence that vibrated with anger, the kind that threatened to shatter. For nearly an hour, muffled voices carried through the walls. Jonathan's low but harsh, layered with the faint static of speakerphone. Then, the sudden crash of something heavy, a glass, maybe, or his fist against the desk. Clara hesitated, her heart racing. Part of her told her to stay put. This was his world, his storm. But another part, the part that had seen him in the dark with his mother's photograph, couldn't ignore it. She rose, padding barefoot down the hall. The closer she came to his office, the louder the storm inside grew. Jonathan's voice, ragged with frustration, a sound she had never heard from him before. When she finally pushed open the door, she found him standing over his desk, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. His laptop lay face down on the carpet, its screen cracked. His hand was still pressed against the mahogany surface, the imprint of his fist visible in the papers beneath it. His chest heaved, his jaw clenched, his eyes wild. Clara froze in the doorway. She had never seen him undone. Not like this. Jonathan looked up, and for a moment, she thought he might snap at her. But instead, he turned away, dragging a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "The deal is dead," he spat. 2 years of negotiations, millions invested gone. The board wanted a green development project, something to show we care about sustainability. I fought for it. I believed in it. And now his voice cracked. The city council shut it down. Every headline tomorrow will call me reckless, naive, a fool who wasted money on a fantasy. He grabbed a stack of papers and threw them across the room. They fluttered down like wounded birds. Clara stepped carefully inside, closing the door behind her. "Jonathan, don't," he said sharply, his back still to her. "Don't tell me it'll be fine. Don't tell me it doesn't matter. Because it does. It matters more than anything I've done in years. It was supposed to change lives. Internet access for underfunded schools. Affordable housing that didn't poison families with mold and asbestos. And now, It's gone. All of it. Gone. His voice broke completely then, shattering into a sound that was less anger and more pain. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't move closer right away. Instead, she lowered herself into the chair opposite his desk, grounding the space with her quiet presence. Jonathan turned, his face pale, his eyes rimmed red. He looked like a man stripped bare. "I tried," he whispered, almost to himself. "I tried to build something that mattered, but I failed." Clara shook her head gently. "You didn't fail. A failed deal doesn't erase who you are or what you've built." He let out a bitter laugh. "Who I am? I'm a man who throws money at problems, hoping it'll make me human, hoping it'll make me enough." Her heart twisted. She rose then, slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. She came around the desk and stopped just a step away. He didn't look at her, his hands gripping the edge as though holding himself upright. Carefully. Clara reached out and placed her hand over his. He flinched at the contact, his body taut. But he didn't pull away. His knuckles were white beneath her palm. "Jonathan," she said softly, her voice steady even as her own heart pounded. "You don't have to carry this alone." For a moment, nothing. Then, finally, he lifted his gaze, and what she saw made her breath catch. His eyes, usually cold steel, now brimmed with tears he could no longer hide. The walls he had built, the armor he wore so relentlessly, crumbled in that one look. It was as if she was seeing him for the very first time, not the billionaire, not the CEO, not the untouchable figure gracing magazine covers. Just a man, a son still trying to live up to a mother's memory. A boy who had learned too young that vulnerability was dangerous. Clara squeezed his hand, her thumb brushing gently across his skin. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. Jonathan's breath shuddered, and for the first time, he let the storm break. His shoulders sagged, his head bowed, and a single tear slid down his cheek. Clara stood beside him, her hand still steady on his, anchoring him in the wreckage. And in that moment, something shifted not just in him, but between them, because the wall wasn't just cracked anymore. It was broken. The storm inside Jonathan had quieted, but the wreckage remained. Papers littered the floor of his office. A glass lay shattered near the door, and his carefully built composure had been torn apart in front of the one person he hadn't wanted to see him weak. Yet, somehow, Clara hadn't left. She still stood beside him, her hand resting over his, anchoring him. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with something unspoken, something that had been building since the day he walked into her shop in the rain. Jonathan broke it first. "I thought money could fix everything," he said, his voice hoarse. He didn't look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on the dark window, where the city lights flickered like restless stars. "I thought if I built enough towers, signed enough deals, filled the world with things that lasted, then maybe I wouldn't feel." He trailed off, swallowing hard. Clara's voice was quiet but firm. Feel what he turned then? His gray-blue eyes raw, stripped of their usual armor, like that boy who lost his mother. "Every night, no matter what I build, no matter how many zeros sit in my account, I still feel like that 15-year-old kid who couldn't save her." Clara's heart clenched. She had seen powerful men unravel in hospital waiting rooms during her volunteer shifts years ago. She knew grief when she heard it the way it hollowed out a person, leaving them endlessly chasing something they could never recover. She wanted to tell him he didn't need to prove himself, that he had already built more than enough, but she knew the words would sound hollow if she rushed them. Instead, she let the silence breathe, let him know she was listening. Finally, she spoke. "I understand." Jonathan let out a bitter laugh. "How could you?" Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the ruler, setting it gently on the desk again. "Because I lost my father, and because I know what it feels like to keep building something, just so you don't feel like you've lost them completely." Jonathan's gaze dropped to the ruler, then back to her. His voice softened. That shop was more than a dream. Wasn't it? Clara nodded, her throat tight. It was survival. After he died, I poured everything I had into it. Every penny, every hour, every ounce of myself. Because if the shop thrived, then maybe a part of him lived on. But she shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. It wasn't enough. I signed your contract because I didn't know what else to do. I needed to save it. Needed to save myself. Jonathan searched her face, his own features taut with something unspoken. Clara took a trembling breath. But somewhere along the way, I started to care about more than the shop, more than survival. I started to care about... She stopped, the words lodging in her throat. About you. The truth hovered in the space between them, fragile and terrifying. Jonathan's jaw flexed. He stepped closer, so close she could see the flecks of silver in his eyes. Clara, he said quietly, her name carrying a weight she hadn't heard before. This wasn't supposed to happen. Her breath caught. What wasn't? This. He gestured vaguely between them, his hand faltering as though the word itself was too dangerous to speak. Whatever this is. For a long moment, neither moved. The city glowed outside, 1,000 windows filled with lives they didn't know, stories they couldn't touch. In here, there was only silence and the echo of confessions too raw to name. Jonathan reached out, almost without realizing it, his fingertips brushing against her wrist where her pulse beat fast and steady. The touch was tentative, as though he expected her to pull away. She didn't. Their eyes locked. And in that quiet office, with the mess of broken glass and scattered papers around them, something shifted. It wasn't love, at least, not spoken. But it was more than performance, more than convenience. It was the spark of something real. Jonathan's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know how to be this. I don't know how to let someone see me like this. Clara's lips trembled, but her voice was steady. Then, let's not name it. Let's just be here. For now. His shoulders eased just slightly, as though the weight of the world had lightened a fraction. For a long time, they stood there, his hand brushing against hers, her eyes steady on his, both of them suspended in a silence that said more than words could. Neither spoke the word they both felt circling closer. Not yet. But they didn't need to, because sometimes the deepest confessions weren't spoken at all. They were felt. The rhythm of the penthouse began to change. At first, it was small things, Jonathan, lingering at the breakfast table instead of rushing out the door with coffee in hand. Clara noticed how he began to eat slowly, actually tasting the food she prepared: eggs, scrambled the way she liked them, toast with just enough butter. One morning, she caught him reading the paper, not for headlines, but for the crossword, pen tapping thoughtfully as he tried to remember a 7-letter word for resilience. They began to walk together in Central Park, slipping into the sea of strangers with no entourage, no press. Clara loved those walks most, the crunch of leaves beneath their shoes, the smell of roasted chestnuts from the street vendors, the way Jonathan's stride softened when he wasn't performing for anyone. He told her once, almost shyly, that his mother used to take him to the very park, sketching the trees while he tried to chase pigeons. Clara shared stories of her father sanding wood late into the night, humming old Johnny Cash songs, teaching her that craft mattered more than profit. Their pasts were different, but the loss threaded their stories together like matching seams. One evening, Clara put on one of her father's favorite records. The needle crackled before a gentle guitar filled the living room. She expected Jonathan to retreat to his office, but instead he sat beside her on the sofa, tie loosened, jacket abandoned across the armrest. "Do you like this?" she asked, curious. He closed his eyes, leaning back. "It reminds me of her, my mother. She used to play music while she painted. Something about it." His voice trailed off. "It feels less empty." Clara said nothing. Just let the music do its work. As the days folded into weeks, Jonathan began to surprise her in ways that unsettled the neat boundaries of their contract. He came home earlier, sometimes with takeout in hand, shrugging as if to downplay it. Thought you might be tired of salmon and asparagus. One Friday, he walked in carrying a small paper bag. There's a bakery near the office. I remembered you like lemon pastries. Clara blinked at him, startled that he had noticed such a detail. She took the pastry, still warm, the sugar dusting her fingertips. Thank you. He only nodded, but there was something softer in his eyes, a warmth she hadn't seen before. Dinner became less about eating and more about talking. Clara teased him about his terrible handwriting. He teased her about her obsession with rearranging furniture. They laughed not politely, not as part of a performance, but freely. And yet, beneath the laughter, both felt the same quiet fear they were no longer pretending. But admitting it out loud could unravel everything. One night, after another gala, they returned home, exhausted. Clara kicked off her heels in the elevator, sighing with relief. Jonathan chuckled, a sound so rare it made her smile. You looked incredible tonight, he said suddenly. Clara's cheeks warmed. That's the champagne talking? No. His voice was steady. It's me talking. The elevator doors opened, and the moment broke. He stepped out first, holding the door for her. Clara followed, her heart pounding too fast for her liking. In her room later, she pressed her hands to her chest, whispering into the dark. This isn't supposed to happen. Jonathan fought the same battle. He found himself leaving the office early, ignoring calls just to be home in time for dinner. He had built an empire on control, on calculating risk. Yet Clara unraveled him in ways no boardroom ever could. One night, he lingered outside her studio door, listening to the faint scratch of her pencil against paper. He wanted to knock, to ask what she was designing, to sit beside her and watch the way her brow furrowed in concentration. But he didn't. Instead, he walked away, telling himself he was protecting them both. Their worlds continued to blur shared breakfasts, quiet park walks, music in the evenings. Clara found herself sketching designs inspired by him, strong lines softened by unexpected curves, cold steel paired with warm wood. She didn't tell him, but her sketchbook was filling with echoes of their life together. Jonathan, in turn, began to notice the way the penthouse felt less sterile with her in it. The couch no longer seemed like a showroom piece once she draped a quilt across it. The kitchen smelled less of lemon polish and more of cinnamon on mornings she baked. For the first time, his home felt like home. And yet, both of them carried the same unspoken fear. If they admitted how much they cared, if they acknowledged that the contract no longer defined them, what then? Would it free them or destroy everything? So, they held their silence. Clara traced her father's ruler before bed, whispering to herself that she wouldn't lose control. Jonathan sat at his desk long after midnight, staring at his mother's photograph, telling himself this wasn't real. But in the quiet spaces, in the shared smiles, in the simple gestures, in the way their eyes lingered too long, they both knew the truth. The lines were blurring, and soon there would be no way back. It began at a luncheon, a glittering midday affair at a private club overlooking the East River. Jonathan was introducing Clara to several board members when a familiar voice, sharp as crystal, cut through the conversation. Jonathan Hale, the woman said, gliding forward in a designer suit that whispered wealth with every stitch. I hardly recognized you. You've finally settled down. Clara turned to face her. The woman was striking early 40s, blonde hair pinned into a sleek twist, confidence radiating from her every move. She extended a manicured hand toward Jonathan, who accepted it with polite restraint. Clara, this is Evelyn Carter, Jonathan said. We worked together years ago. Worked together. Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. We were more than colleagues. Once upon a time, Clara's stomach tightened. Evelyn's gaze slid over Clara, assessing her from head to toe like a jeweler inspecting a stone. And this is your wife, yes, Jonathan said evenly. Evelyn's smile sharpened. Charming. But tell me, Clara, what exactly is it you do, other than attend luncheons and galas? Of course. Clara lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. I'm a designer. I run my own studio. Evelyn's laugh was low and practiced. How quaint. And how fortunate for you, Jonathan, that you found someone so authentic. Though I can't help but wonder. She leaned closer, her voice dropping just enough for the board members nearby to hear. Did she marry you, Jonathan, or your bank account? The words landed like a slap. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but Clara saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. He excused them both quickly, leading Clara away. But the damage was already done. Whispers followed them like shadows. The next morning, Clara woke to her phone buzzing relentlessly. Headlines screamed from every angle Jonathan Hale's mystery wife gold digger, or genuine from failed shop owner to penthouse queen who is Clara Whitmore. Sources. Question. Sudden marriage of real estate mogul. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the articles, each one dissecting her life with cruel precision. Photos of her old Charleston shop appeared beside glossy shots of Jonathan at board meetings. Commentators speculated about her motives, her background, even her wardrobe. She felt sick. When Jonathan emerged from his office hours later, Clara shoved the tablet toward him. Look at this. Do you see what they're saying? He glanced at the headlines, then set it down with cool detachment. The media will always talk. They're not just talking, Clara shot back, her voice cracking. They're tearing me apart. And you... Jonathan's eyes narrowed. I can handle them. But what about your board? What about your company? Clara's chest heaved. This was supposed to protect you, Jonathan, to make you look stable. Now I'm the weak link. Maybe I should walk away before I ruin everything you built. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Jonathan stilled. For the first time, he looked shaken. You think walking away would fix this? He asked quietly. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. I think maybe I was foolish to believe I belonged in your world. Evelyn was right. I'll always look like the outsider who married the billionaire. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan crossed the room in 3 strides. Clara, look at me. She shook her head. Look at me, he repeated, firmer this time. Her eyes lifted, glistening with unshed tears. You are not a mistake, and you are not the weak link. His voice was low, steady, but charged with something fierce. I brought you into this because you're the only person who isn't playing a role. You are the only real thing in this entire arrangement. If they can't see that, then that's their blindness, not yours. Clara's breath hitched. But what if they turn against you? What if you lose everything? Jonathan's jaw tightened. This was the choice. The line he could no longer straddle: protect his carefully constructed image, or protect the woman who had become more than just a contract. For once, the answer came without calculation. Then let them, he said. I won't let them destroy you to protect me. Clara's eyes widened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let those words wrap around her heart and quiet the fear. But another part of her, the part still clinging to survival, whispered that love and loyalty were luxuries she couldn't afford to trust. Jonathan stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth of him. Clara, he said, his voice softer now, you are the one thing they can't control. Don't let them make you doubt that. She searched his face, looking for cracks, for any sign that this was another performance. But all she saw was truth, and that terrified her more than any headline ever could. That night, Clara lay awake, the city's glow spilling through the curtains. She held her father's ruler in her hand, tracing the carved letters over and over. For the first time since signing the contract, she realized she wasn't afraid of failing herself. She was afraid of failing him. And Jonathan, pacing in his office with the headlines scattered across his desk, realized something he had never admitted even to himself. Protecting Clara mattered more than protecting his empire. The boardroom of Hale Enterprises was designed to intimidate. A sweeping glass table, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Manhattan's skyline. Jonathan had sat at its head countless times, steering billion-dollar deals with steady precision. But today, every eye in the room was turned on him, not with respect, but with suspicion. Headlines from the past week lay scattered on the table. Gold digger wife, Jonathan Hale's reckless choices. Evelyn Carter sat 2 seats down, her smile sharp as a blade. Jonathan. One board member began carefully. These distractions are harming the company's reputation. Investors are nervous. Clients are asking questions. We need reassurance that your personal life won't jeopardize Hale Enterprises. Reassurance, Evelyn interjected smoothly. We need a solution. It's clear this arrangement is a liability. She looked directly at Jonathan. End it. Quietly. Before the damage spreads. Jonathan's jaw tightened. For a moment, he said nothing, letting the hum of the city fill the silence. He could feel the weight of the ruler in his pocket, a reminder of Clara's strength, her stubborn dignity. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but unyielding. You want me to end it? To admit this marriage was just a performance. Several heads nodded. Evelyn leaned back, confident. Jonathan's gaze swept across the room. Then, let me be perfectly clear. I don't need a performance. The room stilled. I need the truth, he continued, his voice steady, louder now. He stood, pushing his chair back, the scrape echoing like a gavel. And the truth is, I love her. The words reverberated through the boardroom, hanging heavy in the stunned silence that followed. No one spoke. Evelyn's smile faltered. Jonathan adjusted his jacket, his composure sharpened not by coldness this time, but conviction. If this company can't withstand me choosing honesty over image, then maybe it doesn't deserve to stand at all. And with that, he gathered his papers and walked out, leaving the board in silence behind him. The penthouse was quiet when Jonathan returned. Too quiet. Clara, he called, his voice echoing through the cavernous rooms. No answer. His chest tightened. He strode down the hall to her room and froze. She was standing by the bed, her suitcase half packed, clothes folded neatly, her sketchbook tucked carefully between layers. On the nightstand. The ruler sat beside Jonathan's business card, as though she had been deciding which one to carry with her. She looked up when he entered, her eyes brimming with sorrow. Jonathan? He stepped forward quickly. Don't! His voice cracked. Don't leave. Clara's throat worked, but the words came out in a whisper. Maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe I don't belong here. I can't stand watching them tear you apart because of me. Jonathan closed the distance between them, his hand reaching to cover hers before she could zip the suitcase. Clara! Listen to me. I told them. I told the entire board. She blinked, confused. Told them what? That this isn't a performance. That I don't care about the headlines or the whispers or their damn reputations. His voice steadied, his eyes burning into hers. I told them the truth, that I love you. Her breath caught, the words hitting her like a rush of wind. You said that. Out loud, he nodded, out loud. For the first time in my life, I stopped playing the role they expect of me, and I don't regret it. Clara's eyes filled with tears, spilling over before she could stop them. Jonathan. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek. Clara Whitmore. You walked into my life when I was drowning in silence. You made this place feel alive. You made me feel alive. And I can't. His voice broke, but he pushed through. I can't go back to the man I was before you. I won't. The suitcase slipped from her grip, landing softly against the carpet. Clara's hands trembled as they rose to cover his. I signed this contract to survive, she whispered, her voice shaking. But somewhere along the way, I started to care. More than I should. More than I wanted to admit. And now? Her words dissolved into tears. Jonathan pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. Then don't admit it, he murmured. Just feel it. Just be here. With me? For a moment, the world stilled the headlines, the contracts, the judgments of strangers. There was only the two of them, breathing the same air, their hearts pounding in sync. And then, finally, Jonathan kissed her. It wasn't careful, or calculated, or staged for cameras. It was raw, desperate, filled with all the words they hadn't spoken. Clara melted into him, her hands clutching his shirt as though anchoring herself to the truth she had been so afraid of. When they pulled apart, breathless, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers again. "No more performances," he whispered. "No more contracts. Just us. Whatever that means." Clara let out a shaky laugh through her tears. "Just us," she echoed. And for the first time since the rain-soaked night he had walked into her shop, Clara felt no fear, only love. The new studio in Brooklyn was nothing like the penthouse. It wasn't polished or pristine, and Clara loved it for exactly that reason. The brick walls were old, painted white but chipped in places, revealing red beneath. Sunlight poured through tall factory windows, falling across bolts of fabric and sketches pinned haphazardly to a corkboard. The floor creaked when she walked, and sometimes the radiator hissed like it was protesting its own existence. But it was hers. Jonathan had helped her secure the lease, introducing her to a landlord who owed him a favor. But after that, Clara insisted on doing things her way. She chose the paint, hauled the furniture, and arranged the space until it felt alive with her fingerprints. Jonathan had watched quietly, respecting the independence she fought for, though she noticed how often he lingered in the doorway just to see her smile. On the first morning the studio opened, Clara brewed a pot of coffee in a chipped French press and stood at the window, gazing out at the street below. People bustled past, artists, shopkeepers, children with backpacks too big for their shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt grounded. Jonathan appeared behind her, tie loosened, holding 2 cups. He handed her one. "To beginnings," he said simply. She clinked her mug against his. "To beginnings." Jonathan's life changed too, in ways his board would never have predicted. He still worked long hours, but he began drawing lines he had never dared draw before. He left the office in time for dinner, turned his phone off on Sundays, and sometimes even skipped a meeting if it meant keeping a promise to Clara. At first, his colleagues looked stunned. Then, grudgingly, they adjusted. Hale Enterprises did not collapse without his constant vigilance. If anything, his clarity of purpose made him sharper. Clara noticed it most in the little things. He laughed more. He listened more. He no longer ate like a soldier on a schedule, but like a man savoring the moment. Their home, still the penthouse, though no longer empty, began to change. 2. One Saturday afternoon, they went to a small nursery in Brooklyn. Clara wandered among rows of ferns and orchids, her eyes bright. Jonathan followed, carrying pots without complaint. "Which one?" he asked, holding up a fiddle-leaf fig that was nearly taller than he was. Clara tilted her head. "That one looks like it has secrets. Let's take it." Jonathan smirked. "Only you would say a plant has secrets. Only you would buy it anyway," she teased. They returned to the penthouse with arms full of greenery. Slowly, the sterile white and chrome space softened. Plants filled corners, shelves gained color, and the scent of earth replaced the old lemon polish. Evenings became their favorite time. Clara cooked sometimes, Jonathan others. She taught him how to chop onions without crying. He taught her how to make pasta from scratch, flour dusting the counters like snow. Once, when she burned the chicken, Jonathan surprised her by laughing. "We'll order pizza," he said, dialing before she could apologize. They ended up eating on the balcony, boxes open, watching the city lights as though it were the most natural thing in the world. And then there was the night of the ruler. Clara had been working on a new design, measuring wood panels for a custom shelving unit. She brought out her father's ruler, laying it carefully across the workbench. Jonathan wandered in, loosening his tie. "Need a hand?" She glanced up. "You building something with your hands." He chuckled. "Don't sound so shocked." Together, they sanded the edges, measured twice, hammered carefully. Jonathan's strikes were too forceful at first, the nails bending. Clara laughed. guiding his grip until he got it right. When the shelf finally stood upright, slightly crooked but solid, Jonathan leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. Not bad. Clara held up the ruler, tracing the carved letters of her father's name. He'd like this. Us. Building something together. Jonathan's gaze softened. He reached out, brushing sawdust from her cheek. Then, let's keep building. Her heart swelled, not just at the words, but at the way he said us. Life didn't become perfect. The papers still wrote stories. Evelyn still circled like a hawk, and Jonathan still had days when his old armor threatened to return. Clara, too, had moments of doubt, times she wondered if she was enough for this world he inhabited. But those fears grew quieter with every shared breakfast, every crooked shelf, every lemon pastry he remembered to bring home. They were no longer pretending. They were choosing, day by day, piece by piece. They were building something real. The afternoon sun slanted across the wide windows of Clara's Brooklyn studio, painting the wooden floor in long amber stripes. The air carried the familiar scent of fabric, chalk, and fresh coffee, her favorite mix, one that grounded her like nothing else. She stood at her work table, pinning a bolt of fabric the color of deep emerald. Her hands moved with practiced ease, but her mind drifted. She thought of her father, of the little shop in Charleston, of the strange, winding path that had brought her here. The door creaked open, and Jonathan stepped inside, his tie loosened, his jacket folded over his arm. He looked out of place in the cozy chaos of the studio, but Clara had grown used to that. Somehow, he belonged here anyway. "You're early," she said, glancing up with a smile. "I left the office before they found something else for me to fix," he replied lightly. But there was a tension in his eyes she couldn't quite name. He moved closer, stopping a step away from her table. His gaze fell on the fabric in her hands. That color. Clara smoothed it gently. "I've been saving it for something special." Jonathan's lips curved, faint and almost wistful. "I remember. You were holding a piece just like it the first night we met." Clara stilled. She hadn't realized he would remember such a small detail. "I remember everything about that night," he continued, his voice lower now. "The rain on the glass. The way you stood there refusing to back down, even when everything felt like it was slipping away." Her chest tightened. "Jonathan." Before she could finish, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's breath caught. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple ring. The band was understated, elegant, and set with a single stone green-blue, almost the exact shade of the fabric she held. Not a diamond, not ostentatious, just real. "I don't want contracts anymore," Jonathan said, his voice rough but steady. "I don't want arrangements or performances. What I want is this you, us, for real." Her hand flew to her mouth, tears springing instantly to her eyes. Jonathan stepped closer, holding the ring out between them. "Clara Whitmore, you changed everything. You taught me that silence doesn't have to be empty. That home isn't glass towers, it's laughter over burnt chicken. It's crooked shelves built with rulers carved by love. It's you. It's always been you." Her tears spilled over, warm trails down her cheeks. He went down on one knee, right there between fabric bolts and sketches taped to the walls. "Marry me, not because of a contract, not because of what it proves to anyone else, but because I can't imagine this life without you in it." Clara's hands trembled, clutching the edge of the table for balance. She had never dreamed of a grand proposal, never imagined a perfect moment in a ballroom or on some windswept beach. But here, in her messy little studio, surrounded by the fragments of her dreams, she knew this was perfect. She knelt down in front of him, her tears falling freely now. "Jonathan Hale, I was so afraid at first, afraid of losing myself, afraid of losing everything I had left. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being afraid of the world and started being afraid of only one thing." He searched her face. "What's that? Losing you." Jonathan's eyes glistened. The sharp businessman nowhere to be found, just the man, raw and unguarded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." His relief came in a rush, a smile breaking across his face as he slid the ring onto her finger. The stone caught the sunlight, glowing with the same green blue as the fabric between them. Clara looked down at it, her chest aching with joy. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It reminded me of you," Jonathan said softly. "Not flashy, just true." She laughed through her tears, throwing her arms around his neck. He held her tightly, his face pressed into her shoulder, as if anchoring himself to the moment. When they pulled back, Jonathan kissed her slow, reverent, filled with all the weight of a promise no contract could ever match. Clara rested her forehead against his, her hand in his, the ring glinting between them. "No more performances," she whispered. "No more contracts," he echoed. "Just love," she finished. "Just us." He agreed. The studio, with its chipped walls and creaking floor, seemed to hum with the truth of it, and for the first time, neither of them was afraid. The late afternoon sunlight spilled across the Whitmore and Hale design studio, catching on the glass vases filled with fresh flowers and the polished wood of custom shelves. The place hummed with energy, customers browsing racks of carefully crafted decor, apprentices bustling at work tables, and the air alive with the scent of cedar and linen. At the heart of it all stood Clara, her hair pulled back, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, pinning a fabric swatch to a board. 2 years had passed since she first stepped into this studio, and, in that time, her dream had bloomed into something larger than she ever imagined. Her designs were praised for their warmth, for creating spaces that felt lived in and loved rather than staged. Magazines called her the voice of modern comfort, but Clara brushed off the titles. What mattered most was when a customer left smiling, saying, "This feels like home." She looked around now, pride swelling in her chest. This was hers, built not from desperation, but from resilience. A small voice broke her reverie. Mama Clara turned, her heart leaping at the sight of her son toddling toward her. Samuel Hale, not yet 2, wobbled across the polished floor with determined little steps, his dark hair falling into his wide blue eyes. In his hands, he clutched the wooden ruler, her father's ruler, dragging it like a beloved toy. "Careful, Sam," Clara said, kneeling to catch him just as he stumbled. She scooped him into her arms, kissing his chubby cheek as he squealed with delight. At the doorway, Jonathan leaned against the frame, watching them with a smile that reached deeper than any she had seen in the early days. He had shed the constant tension he once carried, his tailored suit worn with ease rather than armor. But the most striking change wasn't in his clothes or his posture, it was in his eyes. They shone now, not with calculation, but with peace. Escaped from nap time again. "Did he?" Jonathan asked, walking in. Clara laughed, bouncing Samuel on her hip. "He inherited your stubborn streak. I prefer to call it determination," Jonathan replied, kissing Samuel's forehead before brushing a tender kiss across Clara's temple. Later that evening, they returned to the penthouse, no longer a museum of glass and silence, but a home filled with warmth. Plants flourished in the corners, Samuel's toys scattered across the rug, and the scent of dinner filled the kitchen. Jonathan set the table while Clara stirred the pot on the stove. Samuel sat in his high chair, banging a spoon against the tray with gleeful abandon. "This," Jonathan said suddenly, pausing with a stack of plates in his hands. Clara glanced up. "This what?" He smiled, a softness in his expression that still took her breath away. "This is my favorite deal I've ever made." Clara rolled her eyes affectionately. "Jonathan Hale, you still talk like a CEO even in the kitchen." He set the plates down and came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Then, let me rephrase. Out of all the choices I've made, choosing you is the one that matters." Clara leaned back against him, her heart swelling. "We chose each other." He kissed her shoulder. "Yes, and I'd choose you again. every day. Samuel squealed then, demanding attention, and Jonathan swept him up effortlessly, tossing him into the air until laughter filled the room. Clara watched them, her eyes misting with a joy she once thought she'd never find. Later, after Samuel was asleep, Clara and Jonathan stood together on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly before them. 2 years ago, this view had felt cold and unreachable to Clara. Tonight, it shimmered with promise. Jonathan slipped his hand into hers, their fingers interlacing. "Do you ever think about how it started?" he asked quietly. Clara chuckled. "Every time I walk past a boutique with a for lease sign, I remember you walking into my life like some impossible storm. And you," Jonathan said, his smile tinged with awe, "looked at me like I wasn't a billionaire or a CEO or some name in a headline. You just saw me." Clara squeezed his hand. "Because you were worth seeing." They fell into silence then. The good kind, the kind that was no longer heavy with walls, but filled with peace. Clara rested her head against his shoulder. "We began with a contract." Jonathan kissed her hair. "We stayed because of love." She smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Sometimes, the best deals in life are the ones you never saw coming." He finished. They stood there, hand in hand, as the city pulsed below and the stars blinked faintly above. And for the first time in both their lives, they felt not like survivors, not like actors in a performance, but like people who had found their home at last. At its heart, this story isn't about wealth or contracts, or even the glitter of New York society. It is about two people who dared to open their hearts after loss. Clara, holding on to the memory of her father through a simple wooden ruler, teaches us that strength often looks quiet, measured not by power, but by persistence. Jonathan, a man who thought success could replace love, learns that true stability comes not from reputation, but from connection. The lesson is simple, yet profound. Home is not a building. It is the people who make us feel seen. Love cannot be bargained or staged. It must be chosen, every single day. For those of us who have lived long enough to know the weight of grief or the ache of dreams slipping away, Clara and Jonathan remind us it is never too late to build something real. Sometimes, the best chapters of our lives begin when we are brave enough to let go of control and brave enough to let someone in. So, ask yourself what matters most: the contracts you keep or the love you choose. Thank you, dear friends, for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of love, resilience, and second chances, we invite you to support our journey. Please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story. Your encouragement helps us keep bringing these heartfelt tales to life. Until next time, may your days be filled with hope, warmth, and love.